Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing the day one of the Swiss stage, so if you enjoy the content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. To begin with, there were a decent amount of games today. We saw 8 in total, of which some of them were decent games. These are the 3 which I'm going to be covering. Some of them were just stomps, being the C9 Mad game. Mad looked pretty bad. They just didn't play particularly well and had really shaky performances. Fnatic also really struggled against LMG. LMG only really kind of had Fnatic only really had a chance when LMG made some blunders. Past that wasn't too great from Fnatic. Oscarum was the high point in that game. Gam also got stomped by Gen.G. That was the other kind of stomp within the day. But the main ones I want to talk about are T1, TL, BDS versus JG, and G2 versus D+. So let's get into it. To begin with, T1 versus Team Liquid was the first game of the day. We saw I was hoping for some level of anti-meta, where we see answers coming out for the Kaiser, the Xayah picks, which were really prominent during pick-ins, whether we would see some sort of answer towards Orianna being very much proud as well, alongside that Taliyah being pretty high presence, and then like an answer towards Kalista being very much the strongest lane bully in the bot lane at the moment. So blue side being T1, banned away Ziggs, Neeko, and Kalista on phase 1, obviously putting respect on APA and getting rid of 2 of his champions. Kalista very much is just a high prio ban. People don't really like handshaking this champion, especially if you are picking something like the Kaiser and something like the Xayah. Obviously, on the red side, we saw respect ban towards Gumayusi, making sure he doesn't really have access to this Caitlyn lane bully, which we oftentimes see in competitive events. Alongside that, Poppy got banned, banning away towards Oner. He's really strong on this champion, and if you're looking to pick something like Release him, then this is a ban you do tend to want to pick up. Azir, a ban towards Faker, making sure he doesn't have access to this champion. B1, Orianna, makes sense. This champion is at the moment is seen as the best mid laner in the game. As a response to that, we saw Syndra. I prefer Syndra in the matchup. She does have really strong burst capabilities and can really make Ori's life quite painful during the early game, especially as she can trade a lot easier and has access to more damage. This then kind of swaps later on into the game where Ori's team fighting is a lot better. Her W, when you start getting points in the W, her burst potential is also really high, especially if you're going something like the Luden's Shadow Flame build, as opposed to something like the Liandry's Archangels variant. Of course, Syndra has access to both builds as well. You don't tend to pick up Archangels, but you can go something like Liandry's Cosmic. R2 was Lee Sin in this situation. He is in a really strong spot at the moment, especially for competitive play. People do enjoy playing this champion as well, and it makes sense for Pyosik to pick this champion up. Moving on to B2, B3 pick, we saw Ashe Renata. This was surprising considering both Kaiser and Xayah were open, and I was expecting some sort of handshake alongside maybe like an Alistar pickup or Overcome pickup. Instead, we saw Ashe Renata. I'm not a huge fan of Renata coming out this early, but I do like Ashe. She does provide a good amount of util and damage and has a good time in most laning phases. As a counter to this, they picked Aphelios, which I'm not a huge fan of at the moment. This champion's really weak within the current meta. He's had nerfs towards his turret, his slow, and his gravitum, slow being gravitum, and then his healing on the Severum. Overall, just not in as strong a spot as he used to be back when he was meta as a champion. Moving into the second phase of bans, we saw Kennen and Blitzcrank banned away against Team Liquid, obviously kind of dissuading the idea of a hook champ. They might just not be a huge fan of the idea that CoreJJ has access to something like the Blitzcrank. Kennen, obviously something which Summit does play, banning that away gets rid of an AP lane bullying the top lane, which would be something which they look at when they do have the Lee Sin pickup. On the red side, we saw bans towards Gnar and Jarvan, ban primarily being a ban towards Oner and Summit. Oner and Zeus, which are 2 of them more notable champions, definitely, especially with them being strong within the current meta. Gnar, pretty good lane bully, did receive some buffs towards his Mega Form, so he can be quite a menacing champion. We then saw Rell get picked up. Makes sense, this champion's in a really good spot at the moment, especially as a support. She is a jungle flex pick, but with Lee Sin being picked, you lose that flex potential, and obviously it's just throwing it in the support lane. Moving on to B4, B5, we saw Sejuani Jace get picked up. Not a huge fan of this. Sejuani really going to struggle with 4 range champions. Of course, Jace can pocket with the melee form, but he is someone who does flex between them too. I also just not a huge fan of Sejuani in general. This champion has been nerfed a huge amount. Nerfs towards the R, nerfs towards the QCD, nerfs towards the W damage will just hurt this champion in its ability to clear, ability to consistently rotate spells, and its ability to secure picks throughout the game. Jace, Zeus pickup. He's obviously played a lot of his champion in the past. We don't see a huge amount of Jace top lane, so this was also kind of surprising, but works thematically with like a long range poke and pick comp. It's still just not a huge fan of Renata within this situation. It did end up going the Radiant Knights version, but still would have liked something else other than this pick. As a response, I would have liked to have seen Malphite here. I do think K'Sante on R5 is a blunder when something like Malphite is open, but Summit, I guess, kind of was looking for the ego play and picked up K'Sante. It can function, but was really struggling early on into the game against the Conqueror Jace. And then when Jace had a lot of gold, was able to really start hammering a lot of damage out, rotating 2 lots of Qs through his E with the Shojin variant. Overall, T1 did end up going to win this game, even though Pyosik did put out a really good performance on the Lee Sin. Wasn't quite enough. The Aphelios looked really bad. APA was missing a lot of EQs, which you really can't be doing, especially in competitive, where you really do have to land the skill shots to kind of secure these picks. Overall, Pyosik played really well. Yeon looked pretty bad, and the drafts, I would just not recommend picking Aphelios. That was kind of the main takeaway of this game. And Ability Haste Jace looks really good, especially with the amount of rotations you can get through of your combo. Moving on to the second game which I'll talk about was BDS versus JG. I really enjoyed this draft, especially because it was very much a BDS comfort draft. We saw the Garen, we saw the Cassie pick up later on, but covering the bans, Kalista once again banned away. People do not want this champ to get through. It is really just not something great within trade-offs. It's really strong within like lane bully scenarios where you do have a team playing around that bot lane. Talia, also another high prio champion within the game at the moment. Really valuable jungle mid flex pick. And Kennen, a really strong AP top lane bully. Opens up the ability for AD junglers for the most part and applies a lot of pressure on the top lane with good team fighting on the ultimate. Red side banned, JGG took away Adams Darius, obviously performing really well on this champion. It's getting rid of a lot of comfort, being Nuclear Ints, Orianna, and Shio's Maokai. For B1, Xayah, so we get the handshake of Kaiser Ali being picked up on R1, R2. Vyvern gets picked up, which I'm not a huge fan of. I think there are better champs which you can pick up on B2, but Shio definitely has comfort on this champion, so it makes sense why he would pick this champ up. Alongside that, you then do pick up the Rakan, making sure you get the Xayah-Rakan pairing. Jarvan then comes out for JGG on R3. This is the Gordrenka Shojin build, which we saw within the game. Going on to the second ban phase, we saw Nico and Renekton banned for BDS against JGG, and then we saw JGG ban away the Olaf and the Azir, getting rid of another one of Nuke's picks, and once again pinching more of Adam's pool. They do want to kind of push away from BDS's comfort, which is how BDS was getting an edge on them in the beginning of this game. So we do see that comfort go through. Of course, in these 2 picks, Ahri then gets picked up on R4, working quite well with the Jarvan and can be punishing and safe at the same time within the mid lane. Coming in as a response, we saw Garen, comfort pick for Adam, and then Nuclear Int picking the Cassiopeia up. Works quite well within the context of this draft. Saw a lot of good ultimates get used. The main kind of but that was kind of the point of the Cassiopeia, the comfort and really strong ultimate picks. On R5 we saw the Ornn then get picked up, putting 369 on weak side. Really just kind of putting him in a matchup where he's not going to be too vulnerable towards the Garen, but can still scale within the game and be pretty tanky and a threat later on, especially with the item upgrades towards the likes of Kaiser and Jarvan, 2 champs which really value that mythics being upgraded. overall, we saw BDS put up a good fight early on to this game. We saw Shio make good plays. We saw Adam pick up a lot of kills. The Cassiopeia looked really good in getting picks with the ultimate and just outputting a lot of DPS with the Roa and the Seraphs. The main filtering point of BDS ended up coming down to just being picked. We saw the Garen get picked in River running into 5 at Drake Pit. We saw Shio get picked a couple of times without the Q. And overall, it kind of just ended up being a bit of a bleed out. And JGG ended up being more comfortable in the team fights and securing the win. So it was exciting to see BDS definitely playing comfort, which I think is the best way to go about it. Having Adam on a later pick, not something like the Renekton or the Cassante, on something which he's comfortable on, the Garen, the Set, the Olaf, Darius, and yeah, that was good to see. Then the final game which I want to talk about was the G2 versus Damwon game. It was going to be the closest of all the European games. G2 is definitely our best team going into Worlds, so it was exciting to see them play. Blue side, we saw, which was G2, we saw bans towards Caitlyn, Jarvan, and Lee Sin, respecting Deft and Canyon. On red side, we saw bans towards Nico, Kalista, and Cassante, getting rid of some of the OPs, definitely. B1, we saw Orianna, Caps, pretty comfortable on this champion. R1, R2, we saw Alistar. Alistar, really high prio within the first day of the Swiss stage. We also saw the Azir pickup, definitely something which can work against the Orianna. Could have also been a Syndra pickup here. I know Showmaker plays both of them quite well. B2, B3, we saw comfort pickup for Yike on the Maokai. Really like Maokai at the moment. He's in a really good spot. A tanky, high damage, good pick champion. Draven, comfort for Hans Sommer. We saw this champ perform really well within the game. Varus, I'm not a huge fan of this champion. I don't think any of its variations are in a great spot at the moment. The main kind of selling point of this champion is the fact that it has a lot of options. The lethality, the AP, and the on-hit. You can kind of pick which one you want within the context of the game. It went lethality in this game, which I mean is probably the best for the comp. They were a high range Azir, Varus, Jace comp, but it wasn't outputting the level of damage which old lethality Varus used to, so it kind of struggled within that space. You couldn't really afford to go on hit with the Renata pickup on B5. But moving on to second phase, we saw Vi Rumble Band against Damwon, and we saw Pyke, Jax putting respect on BB and Mickey X, making sure they don't have access to these champions. R4, we saw Varel come out. This is obviously going jungle with Alistar already being picked up. Towards Canyon, he found a lot of really strong engages on this champion, where they almost managed to turn the game against G2 in Baron Pit and on a Drake fight, finding big picks onto Hans Sama on both occasions. Renekton and Renata came through on B4, B5 for G2. Pretty strong picks for both Mickey X, especially into the likes of Alistar and Rel, and a really nice pick for BB on the Renekton. He is a very strong lane bully at the moment, lane bully and mid-game team fighter. He's relatively tanky, does a lot of damage, good AD bruiser pickup there. And then, as an answer to the Renekton, Jace was picked up, was really working quite well against the pick in the top lane earlier on into the game, then kind of had a bit of a struggle when it got picked a couple of times. However, the Jace then did go on to pick up 2 kills, I believe, at the Baron fight, and was 3 items and doing a huge amount of damage, finding really good angles, and yeah, just once again rotating a lot of damage through its combos. But overall, it wasn't enough. G2 ended up winning. Overall, just thematically, I wasn't a huge fan of Damwon's draft, and G2 at the end of the day looked like the better team, especially on champs which they were proficient at, and Hans Sommer looking really, really strong with Drave and going the Dirk into Triforce, into Collector build, and just outputting a huge amount of DPS within these team fights, whilst having the Renata with Locket being able to support him really well, denying people from really being able to get it onto him with the Q and the ult coming out, especially like in these chokeholds where the Varus and the Azir didn't have much room to really kind of play around it. So overall, those were my thoughts on 3 of the games within today. They were exciting games, definitely. We should see exciting games tomorrow with the with the two groups, the 1-0 pool and the 0-1 pool. We will see what kind of develops as the tournament goes on, whether the meta shifts, whether we do end up seeing this anti-meta, or whether we do just end up handshaking Kaiser, Xayah for the most part, and then certain teams picking Comfort to try and kind of like put a swing and hopefully taking games off the top seeds within the region, or taking games off them for the most part, China and the top of Korea, so being like T1 Gen.G, and then JGG looking like the favourites for sure, but did look relatively shaky against BDS early on into the game when they won against something which they were comfortable with, which was exciting to see. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next one. Goodbye.